Hey, how's it going? This is Stan on another Philosophy Drive. It's been a while since the last one, and that is a tragedy that is going to be remedied right now. So today we're going to talk about a few mechanical issues and a couple implications they have for philosophy and other stuff. So first, let's talk about genetics for a minute. So we all have a genotype. Why don't you have wings? Dude, why don't you have wings? Because of your genotype. Your genotype did not give you wings. What color is my hair? Is my hair blonde? Do I have 8 eyes? How many legs do I have? Do I have antennae? Do I have wings? What kind of wings? All of that is determined by my genotype. Okay. So, let's say you have two competing critter populations. They're competing over a single food source. One of them, their genotype dictates that they generally be furry and chunky, and the other creature is kind of skinny and spindly and hairless. Now let's say the environment suddenly changes to extreme cold, and it's going to be that way for a while, many generations from here on out. If that's the case, what's going to happen? Well, the former critter, the chunky furry critter, is going to have a higher likelihood of passing on his genes to new generations. That's because the genotype is suited to his environment. Whereas with the second critter, his genotype is not suited. It is ill-suited to his environment, which means he might even not survive to making kids. And if he does, then he might have less kids, or he might have the same amount of kids, but he's unable to care for them in the way that the first critter could. You take this general fact and you multiply it out over generation, and eventually what happens is the former critter population is dominant. So that's suitedness and ill-suitedness. We can also talk about species groups forming. We talk about the effect that various barriers in the environment have, like a mountain range might cause allopatric speciation. There's all sorts of cool patterns, but it's kind of like when you have like a giant domino setup with all sorts of crazy stuff on it, and that stuff is crazy and awesome to look at and incites wonder and excitement in you. But at its core, it's just one domino knocking down the next, right? So in this case, it's just mechanical. Okay, genes generally determine your suitedness and ill-suitedness in environment. So the environment kind of acts like a selector. Because you can talk about suitedness and ill-suitedness, the environment is now being a selector. It's kind of like if I'm a dog breeder and I'm like, you know what? I want the tiniest, white as snow dog breed after a while. I want to make that happen. I become the environment, and if I'm selective, then I say, okay, that's a big dog. I'm not going to let him breed. That dog is not white as snow. I'm not going to let him breed. Ooh, that's a tiny dog who's white as snow. Or, ooh, that's white as snow and he's kind of tinier. I let him breed. And then over time, guess what happens? My desired breed comes out the other end after generation after generation. So again, this is just mechanics. It's not that big of a deal. The cool thing is, when we recognize that it's about mechanics, all we have to do is look for analogs of those mechanics, and we can find analogs of those bigger patterns in unrelated things unrelated to genes, or only somewhat related to genes. So one of the things we've done this with in the early 80s, a scientist named Richard Dawkins came up with the term called the meme. And a meme is a social information gene. And he realized that, you can talk about a lot of the same patterns. A lot of the same patterns follow from the fact that, it's got a certain configuration. It can have suitedness or ill-suitedness. Like, let's say I make a recipe. I come up with a recipe and I advertise it as like, this is an awesome dish, and it's it requires ingredients that you probably already have in your fridge, and it's easy to make, and it makes big portions, and your family will be like, wow, you are a master chef. So I tailored this is a meme because it's information, and it's social information. I put it out there. It's going to perhaps have suitedness for certain demographics. So, like, maybe housewives and house husbands look at this thing and are like, oh, cool, I like that, and I am more likely to pass this on to friends and family. And so you create this suitedness in certain environments. Whereas if you have, like, top 5 splatterfest video games, well, that's not going to do so well in certain demographics. Okay. So we talk about suitedness and ill-suitedness. Before, when we were talking about suitedness and ill-suitedness in issues of environmental selection, that the word is fitness. That's the official word. And the reason why I don't like that word so much is because the word fitness has overtones and connotations of goodness. And it's true that it is good for some stuff, like it's good for survival of the genotype, but that doesn't mean that it aligns with things that you and I might generally consider good. For instance, we might say, oh, okay, quality of life is good, satisfaction, joy, peace, charity, fairness, productivity, sense of meaning and value, spiritual growth. You know, we can talk about all these things that we value in our lives and that we would call good. But when we're talking about fitness, selective fitness, all we're talking about is virulence and resilience. So virulence is the ability to spread a lot, and resilience is the ability to stick around so it doesn't just die off after it spreads. So here's the weird thing. You can have a genotype that has great virulence and resilience, but is bad in terms of things that you and I can say we think this thing is good. For instance, it might be bad for justice, it might be bad for truth, it might be bad for quality of life, it might be bad for all these things, but because it is high in virulence and resilience, it wins. It dominates the environment over time. Ugh, that's lame. I wish that only the good stuff was virulent and resilient, but it turns out that good stuff can often imply some measure of virulence and resilience, but the trick comes when those situations pop out where bad stuff is the most virulent and resilient stuff. And when I say bad, I mean bad in terms of things we value. So we can talk about that with a critter. You might have a critter that has highest virulence and resilience, but like eats its own children and does other things that we just think are horrible and abominable. But for whatever reason, there's some sort of evolutionary trade-off, and they have the best virulence and resilience. Their species are going to dominate. Ugh. But we can also talk about this in terms of social information. Whether it's a recipe, like that recipe, you know, I marketed it pretty well. Does that mean it's actually that good? Maybe it's gross. And maybe being gross will hurt its virulence and resilience somewhat, because, you know, a person actually makes it and is like, hey guys, this thing is gross. The trick is that's like after it's already done its spread around the social sphere, whether it's around the convention you're at, or whether it's around the internet or whatever. And if people just can't be bothered to actually make the thing, maybe they're more concerned with just the prospect of making dinner, but then they just kind of go out to McDonald's and blah, 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 and they've already shared that recipe. Yeah. That's a lame situation. Suddenly you have a situation where marketing is more powerful than truth. And by powerful, I mean a thing can be virulent and resilient, but it isn't true. Now, you can probably see a lot of places where this is going. One of the first lessons you learn as a television watcher is that the commercials are all lying to you and exaggerating. They're not telling the truth. They're telling you that that bowl of sugar is part of a balanced breakfast. They're telling you that you can have 0% APR financing, and then in tiny text they have a bunch of qualifications that they'd rather you not read. Why the heck is that text tiny? It's because they want to trick you. They want to deceive you. Otherwise it would be big. And obviously it's not put in terms of deception. It's put in terms of like, well, you know, we just don't want to emphasize that part that much, because that deals damage to our product that we're trying to sell. It's like, well, yeah, of course it does. The truth often does. And when you're in like a competitive situation with other brands and there's no sort of regulation on what you can and can't say, like let's say there's nothing that says you have to tell the truth about the healing properties of your product. Like there's no FDA message on there. You can just say whatever you want and there's not going to be any fact checking. Guess what? Those things do extraordinarily well because people are generally gullible and there's no fixing that. So you have things that are just false. I mean, even with that dang FDA message that says this won't cure anything, these have not been evaluated, guess what? Those brands still make a ton of money. They're not true, but they spread. They have virulence and resilience. We've kind of run out of time for today because I'm at the doggy daycare where I'm dropping off my little dog. And we haven't really gotten to philosophy, but we will. I think this is a good starting point, though. Memes. It's good stuff. Think about it.